The first time my sister-in-law told me I was not welcome at the front entrance of their church banquet, she said it with a smile on her face and a hand still resting on my elbow like she was helping me. "It'll just be easier if you go in through the side hall, Naomi," she said. "The main foyer is for family photos and invited guests." I looked at her for a second because I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. I was family. I had been married to her brother for 11 years. I had packed half the dessert table sitting inside that ballroom. I had spent my Thursday night ironing white tablecloths in my laundry room because the church committee was short on volunteers again. But the way she said invited guests made it clear she meant people who looked like they belonged in the pictures. Behind her, the front steps of Grace Covenant Fellowship were crowded with people in navy suits, satin dresses, pearl earrings, polished shoes, and that careful kind of laughter people use when they know other important people are watching. The church sat on a hill in North Dallas, red brick with white columns, built to look older than it really was. Everything about it was designed to suggest stability, money, and good breeding. Even the landscaping looked expensive. I was standing there in a dark green dress I had bought on clearance at Dillard's 2 years earlier, holding a tray of lemon bars under a plastic cover. My husband, Daniel, had gone ahead inside 20 minutes before to help his uncle with the donor table, which was another way of saying he had wanted to be seen doing something important. I had parked in the overflow lot because the front had already filled with Mercedes, Lexuses, and oversized black SUVs. My shoes were low heels because I knew I would be on my feet all evening. My hands still smelled faintly like butter and vanilla. Lydia gave my elbow a gentle squeeze. "You don't mind, do you?" There are moments when you understand that the person in front of you already knows the answer they expect from you. She did not care if I minded. She cared whether I would make a scene in front of the people gathering behind her. So I said what I had been saying around Daniel's family for years. "No, that's fine." She nodded like I had passed some sort of character test. "Wonderful. And when you come in, just leave the tray with kitchen staff. The caterer has a system." Kitchen staff. I remember that phrase because she did not say it cruelly. She said it casually, which somehow felt worse. Like it was the most natural thing in the world to mistake me for hired help. I walked around the building to the side entrance, carrying my tray with both hands. There were folding tables stacked by the service hallway and a few teenagers from the youth group unloading floral centerpieces from a van. One of them held the door for me and said, "Ma'am, desserts go in the prep room." I told him thank you and kept walking. That was pretty much how my life with Daniel's family had gone from the beginning. Not one vague, dramatic rejection. Just 1,000 smaller moments, each one easy to explain away if you were the kind of person who wanted to keep the peace. Which I had been for a long time. I did not grow up in their world. They never let me forget it, though usually in polite language. Daniel came from one of those Dallas families that seems to exist in several industries at once. His father had a commercial real estate firm. His mother chaired charity luncheons and Bible study committees with the same level of intensity. His older brother Stephen was a finance attorney. Lydia, Stephen's wife, had one of those smooth, effortless lives that looked simple only because so many people were doing difficult things around her. They lived in Highland Park, traveled to Aspen at Christmas, and discussed schools, clubs, and boards the same way regular people discussed weather. I grew up in Mesquite in a 2-bedroom duplex behind an auto parts store. My father drove a city bus for 26 years. My mother worked admissions at a county clinic. We were not poor in the way television likes to show it, but money was always a real thing in our house. We talked about it directly. We planned around it. If the washing machine broke, somebody had to work a Saturday. If school pictures came up the same week as the electric bill, you picked one and felt bad about the other. I was good at math, good with systems, and better with machines than most people expected. After high school, I took classes at Eastfield College and then got into building systems maintenance almost by accident. A friend of mine worked at a facilities company and said they needed someone who could read plans, deal with contractors, and not panic when an HVAC unit shut down in August. I started as an assistant coordinator at 22. By 30, I was managing maintenance operations for 3 medical office buildings. By 35, I was running regional facilities for a healthcare group with properties across Texas and Oklahoma. It was stable work. Good work, actually. The kind that keeps buildings safe and people comfortable, but never gets talked about at dinner parties because nothing is more invisible than competence in an industry nobody glamorous notices. Daniel's family never understood what I did, and after a while I stopped trying to explain it. If I said I oversaw capital repairs, vendor contracts, emergency systems, and compliance upgrades across multiple sites, someone would smile and say, "So sort of like office management?" If I mentioned I was on call for mechanical failures, storm damage, and inspection issues, Lydia would say, "I could never deal with all that blue collar stress." I earned more than Daniel by our 7th year of marriage. No one in his family ever asked directly, but I knew they assumed he carried us. That assumption protected their view of the world. The truth was less flattering to them. Daniel had started and abandoned 3 different ventures by the time he was 41. There was a luxury car brokerage that lasted 10 months, a boutique branding agency that mainly paid for lunches, and then a commercial drone media company he talked about for almost 2 years before admitting it was not going anywhere. He had charm, confidence, and a last name that opened doors. What he did not have was discipline. Not the quiet, repetitive kind that builds a life. By then, my salary paid the mortgage on our house in Richardson. I handled the insurance, retirement contributions, taxes, and most of the household expenses. Daniel still told people he was consulting, which usually meant making calls from coffee shops and waiting for the next introduction from somebody his father knew. I used to cover for him because I thought that was what wives were supposed to do. At Grace Covenant, appearance mattered more than truth. I learned that early. We joined after Daniel said it would help his business contacts. He did not put it quite that bluntly, but that was the meaning. The church had several hundred members and a leadership culture built around successful families. There were prayer breakfasts sponsored by private equity firms, mission dinners underwritten by developers, and youth fundraising galas where the silent auction items included golf weekends and vacation homes. Everyone spoke about humility. Very few practiced it with people beneath their tax bracket. I taught 5th grade girls Sunday school for 4 years and coordinated meal trains for women recovering from surgery. I also fixed things the church maintenance team quietly could not handle. The fellowship hall ice machine, a leaking pipe behind the nursery wall, the scheduling mess that had contractors showing up on the same day the preschool had its Christmas program. Somehow I was always useful but rarely important. Lydia, on the other hand, was important. She chaired the Heritage House Restoration Fund, hosted Bible study in a kitchen bigger than my first apartment, and had a way of making every introduction sound like an audition. "This is Naomi," she would say. "She's Daniel's wife." She's very practical. Practical, in their world, was not a compliment. It meant I knew where to stand. The banquet that night was for the church's Centennial Capital campaign. They were raising money for a new education wing, though if you asked me, the existing classrooms were fine, and the real issue was that the leadership wanted something with their names on plaques. Tickets started at $500 a seat. Donor tables were $10,000 and up. There was a string quartet in the foyer, printed programs with gold lettering, and a guest speaker from a national Christian university flying in from Tennessee. Lydia had asked me 2 months earlier if I could help behind the scenes. That phrase usually translated to work no one prestigious wanted to do. I agreed because saying no always became its own kind of offense. The week leading up to the banquet, I was at the church every evening after work. Tuesday, I stayed until 10:30 p.m. because the rental company delivered the wrong size linens. Wednesday, I redid the seating board after 3 donor families refused to sit near each other over some old business dispute. Thursday, I spent my lunch break driving to Garland to pick up extra votive holders because Lydia changed the table design at the last minute after seeing photos from another church event online. That Friday morning, before the banquet, I had spent 6 hours dealing with a chiller issue at a surgical center in Plano. I left work at 4:15, drove home in traffic, changed clothes, packed the desserts I had promised to bring, and headed straight to the church. I had not eaten dinner. I had not sat down for more than maybe 15 minutes all day. And by 7:05 p.m., I was being directed to use the side entrance. That should have bothered Daniel more than it did. When I found him inside near the donor display, He was laughing with Stephen and two men I recognized from the church finance committee. He looked good in his charcoal suit. Daniel always looked good. He had one of those faces that makes people assume reliability where there may be none. He saw me, gave me a quick smile, and then his eyes flicked down to the dessert tray in my hands. "Can you put that in the back?" he asked. "We're about to start photos." I stood there a second and said, "Your sister already told me." He glanced toward Lydia, then back at me. "Babe, don't do this tonight." That was Daniel's standard line anytime I reacted normally to being treated badly. "Don't do this." Meaning do not force him to notice it. "I'm not doing anything," I said. Stephen turned at that point and gave me a polite little nod. "Naomi, good to see you." He always said my name like he had just read it off a list. Lydia came over with her phone in one hand. "Daniel, we need family at the staircase in 2 minutes." "Oh good, Naomi, you made it in." "Perfect. Just leave the desserts back there, and then maybe check whether they put decaf on the coffee station." Some of our older donors were asking. Older donors. Again, not older members. Not guests. Donors. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to say something small. Anything. Maybe Naomi's not working the event. Maybe she's with me. Maybe I'll check the coffee. He adjusted his cuff and said, "I'll be there in a second." That was when I understood, not for the first time, that my humiliation cost him nothing as long as it bought him smoother access to his family. So I took the tray to the prep room and checked the coffee station. I did it calmly, because by then I had years of practice being calm. You have to understand, I was not one of those women who walked around secretly believing everyone would regret underestimating me. I was tired, not triumphant. I had a normal life with regular bills, an aging Honda, a marriage that looked better from the outside than it felt from the inside, and a job that kept my phone buzzing at all hours. I was not waiting for some dramatic reversal. I was just trying to get through the evening without one more small wound. But the thing about being underestimated for a long time is that people get sloppy. They stop hiding what they really think. And once that starts, they usually go too far. By 7:40, the ballroom was full. Round tables covered in ivory linen. Gold-rimmed water glasses. Little printed cards thanking vision partners. At the front was a stage with 2 projection screens and a wooden lectern flanked by arrangements of white roses and eucalyptus. The room smelled like coffee, perfume, and catered chicken and cream sauce. I was standing near the side wall after making sure the dessert plates were ready when I heard Lydia call my name from across the room. Not softly, not privately. "Naomi, could you come here a moment?" A few people turned. I walked over because when someone uses that tone in public, refusing creates a bigger scene than obeying. She was standing with her mother-in-law, Daniel's mother, Mrs. Holloway, and a couple from the campaign committee. Mrs. Holloway had on a navy beaded dress and her usual expression of gracious disappointment. "There you are," Lydia said. "We have a small problem with seating." I said, "Okay." She lowered her voice just enough to perform discretion, but not enough to keep others from hearing. "The Murchisons made a late change, and we need to free up 2 places at table 7. I already knew where this was going because Daniel and I were seated at table 7. Not because of status, exactly, but because Daniel's father had insisted family be nearby for the speaker. I said, "So where should we sit?" Lydia gave me that same helpful smile from the front steps. "Actually, Daniel needs to stay at 7. He may be introduced during the campaign acknowledgments. Daniel may be introduced." That would have been news to Daniel, who was at that moment across the room telling somebody about a branding proposal he was finalizing. "And me?" I asked. Mrs. Holloway spoke then, very gently. "Well, darling, we thought perhaps you wouldn't mind eating after the program. Since you've been helping with logistics anyway, it just seems simpler. There are humiliations that happen loud and fast. Then there are humiliations that happen in a voice so soft you almost feel rude for hearing the insult inside them." One of the campaign committee members looked down at his program. The other pretended to watch the stage crew. Lydia's face remained pleasant and composed. I remember feeling suddenly very awake. Not emotional. Not shaky. Just clear. I said, "So you sold my seat." Lydia's smile thinned. "Naomi, please don't phrase it that way." Mrs. Holloway added, "This evening is for the kingdom, not personal feelings." That line might have worked on me a few years earlier. By then, it did not. I looked across the ballroom and saw Daniel laughing, drink in hand, not even noticing that his place at the table had been preserved and mine had quietly been erased. And standing there in that overcooled room, with 100 well-dressed people settling into their seats, I had the first calm thought that would change the rest of my life. I am not staying where I have to earn basic dignity from people who enjoy withholding it. I did not argue with them. That's probably the part people don't understand when I tell this story. They expect I said something sharp or walked out right then. I didn't. I stood there, nodded once, and said, "Okay, I'll take care of things in the back." Lydia looked relieved. Mrs. Holloway gave me that approving little glance she reserved for moments when I behaved the way she preferred. It was the same look she used on her grandkids when they didn't interrupt. I turned and walked away before either of them could say anything else. On the way to the prep room, I passed table 7. My place card had already been removed. Daniel's was still there, centered neatly between his parents' names. Someone had shifted the silverware slightly to close the gap where I had been. It was done cleanly, quietly, like I had never been part of it. In the prep room, I set my hands on the stainless steel counter and just stood there for a minute. I could hear the low hum of conversation from the ballroom, the clink of glasses, the faint sound of the string quartet transitioning into something softer as people settled. A teenage volunteer asked me where to place extra forks. I showed him without thinking. I moved automatically for a while, checked the coffee station again, helped the caterer adjust the dessert display, answered 2 quick questions about the program timing. On the outside, nothing had changed. I was still doing what I had been doing all week. But inside, something had shifted into place. It wasn't anger, not in the loud sense. It was more like a decision that had been waiting for the right moment to become clear. By 8:10, the program started. I stood at the back near the service doors while the senior pastor welcomed everyone. He thanked the major donors by name. He spoke about legacy, stewardship, vision. The kind of language that sounds meaningful without ever getting specific. Then the campaign committee chair came up. That was Lydia's friend, Karen Ellison. She talked about the new education wing, the future of the church, and how families like ours were called to lead. Families like ours. I leaned against the wall and listened. Halfway through the opening remarks, Daniel was called to stand with the other emerging leaders being recognized for their commitment to the campaign. He looked surprised, then pleased. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and nodded toward the stage. People applauded. I watched him from the back of the room. That was the moment I realized something else. It wasn't just that they underestimated me. It was that Daniel had started to believe the same version of the story they did. That he was the visible one. That I was support. That whatever I did behind the scenes did not count in the same way. The program continued. Testimonies. A video about the church's history. The guest speaker talking about faith and responsibility and influence. I checked my phone at 8:47. There were 3 missed calls from work. That didn't usually mean anything good. I stepped out into the hallway and called back. It was Miguel, one of my site supervisors in Oklahoma City. "Hey," he said, and I could hear the strain in his voice immediately. "We've got a problem at Northbridge Medical." "What kind of problem?" "The main electrical panel in Building C tripped during the storm. Backup kicked in, but we're getting inconsistent power to 2 floors. The surgical suites are running, but barely. We've got equipment alarms going off." I closed my eyes for a second and leaned against the wall. "When did this start?" "About 20 minutes ago. We tried resetting the panel, but it won't hold. I've got the electrician here, but he says there might be internal damage." "Any patients affected?" "Not yet, but if we lose stable power, they'll have to start moving cases." I looked through the glass doors into the ballroom. Lydia was at the front table, smiling, nodding, fully in control of her evening. "Okay," I said. "Listen carefully. Do not cycle the panel again. Leave it as is. I'm going to call in emergency support and get engineering on standby. You're coming up here?" "I'm working on it." I hung up and immediately called our on-call engineering contractor. Then I called my director. By 8:55, I had 3 people mobilized and a temporary stabilization plan in place, but I needed to be on site. This wasn't something I could manage remotely for long. I walked back into the ballroom quietly and moved along the side toward Daniel's table. He was seated again, leaning in toward Stephen and one of the finance guys, talking and smiling like nothing in the world required urgency. I stood beside him and waited until he noticed me. "Hey," he said, low voice, slightly annoyed. "We're in the middle of the program." "I have to go to Oklahoma City," I said. He blinked. "What?" "Electrical failure at one of the surgical buildings. I need to be there." He glanced at the stage, then back at me. "Tonight?" "Yes. Now." He shifted in his chair. "Naomi, this is the campaign dinner. I know what this is. Can't someone else handle it?" "They're handling it until I get there." He sighed, like I had just made his evening more complicated than necessary. "You're seriously leaving in the middle of this?" I looked at him for a second. "Yes." He leaned back slightly, lowering his voice further. "Do you understand how this looks?" That question sat between us for a moment. I said, "Do you understand what happens if that building loses power?" He didn't answer. Stephen glanced over, clearly catching enough of the conversation to be curious. "Everything okay?" Daniel gave a tight smile. "Yeah, Naomi has a work thing." Stephen nodded like that explained everything. "Of course it did." I said, "I'll drive." "It's about 3 hours. I'll update you in the morning." Daniel didn't stand. He didn't say be careful. He didn't say anything, really. He just said, "All right." I turned and walked out. No one stopped me. Outside, the air had cooled. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the rows of cars. I walked to my Honda, set my bag in the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel for a second without starting the engine. The music from inside was faint through the walls. I took a breath. Then I started the car and drove. The highway was clear once I got out past Plano. By the time I hit the Oklahoma border, it was after 10:30. I kept my phone on speaker, coordinating with Miguel and the engineering team. At 11:18, we had partial stabilization. At 12:05, we identified the exact fault inside the panel. At 1:10 a.m., I was standing in a mechanical room in Oklahoma City in steel-toed boots, holding a flashlight while 2 electricians worked on a temporary bypass. No one there asked what I was wearing earlier that evening. No one there cared about table assignments. They cared whether the lights stayed on. We got the system stable by 2:40 a.m. By 3:15, the surgical floors had full power again. Miguel handed me a bottle of water and said, "You saved us tonight." I shook my head. "We fixed it." He smiled. Still, I stayed until just after 5 a.m. to make sure everything held. Then I got back in my car and drove home as the sun came up. I didn't go back to the church. When I got to the house around 8:30, Daniel was already awake, sitting at the kitchen island with his laptop open. He looked up as I walked in. "You missed quite a night," he said. I set my keys down and took off my jacket. "How did it go?" "Really well," he said. "They raised more than expected. The speaker was incredible." And he paused, a small smile forming. I got introduced during the leadership segment. Lydia put my name in. I nodded slowly. "That's good." He studied me for a second. "You look exhausted." "I am." "You didn't have to leave like that," he said. "It made things awkward." I leaned against the counter. "Daniel, there was a building full of patients that almost lost power." "I'm not saying your job isn't important," he said quickly. "I'm just saying timing matters." I looked at him. "Timing." He shrugged. "You know what I mean." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked to the sink, filled a glass with water, and took a long drink. Then I said, very calmly, "They gave away my seat." He frowned. "What?" "At your table. They replaced me." He hesitated, just for a second. "Well, it was a donor situation, right? Those things happen." "Those things happen," I repeated. He leaned back slightly. "Naomi, you've always been flexible about this stuff." That sentence did something. Not in a dramatic way. Not like a breaking point you see in movies. More like a door quietly closing. "I won't be flexible about it anymore," I said. He stared at me like he wasn't sure what that meant. I picked up my bag. I'm going to sleep. I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and lay down without setting an alarm. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I just lay there and let my mind settle into the same clarity I had felt in the prep room the night before. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to make everything fit. I was starting to see it exactly as it was. I took Monday off. Not officially. I still answered emails and checked in with my team, but I didn't go into the office. I stayed home, sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, and wrote things down in a way I hadn't done before. Not feelings. Facts. Income. Assets. Accounts. Insurance policies. Property ownership. My name was on almost everything. Not because we had planned it that way, but because over time, I had become the one who handled details. The house in Richardson, both names, but the mortgage was auto-drafted from my account. The emergency fund, mine. Retirement contributions, mine and a small, inconsistent one under Daniel's. Vehicle titles, one in each of our names. Utilities, mine. Even the church giving account was linked to my banking. I wrote it all down. Then I wrote another list. What I do. Not the vague version people understood, but the actual scope. Regional Facilities Manager. 8 properties across 2 states. 37 vendors under contract. Capital Project Oversight. Emergency Response Coordination. Compliance Audits. Budget control just under $18 million annually. I sat there looking at it. For years, I had let people reduce that to she's practical. I finished the list and closed the notebook. Daniel came downstairs around 10:30. He had that slightly restless energy he got when he felt like something was off, but didn't want to address it directly. "You're not going in today?" he asked. "I'm working from home." He nodded, poured coffee, and leaned against the counter. "So, about Friday." I waited. "I didn't realize they moved your seat," he said. Lydia mentioned it later. "It wasn't a big deal, though, right? Just logistics." I watched him for a moment before answering. "It was a decision," I said. He frowned slightly. "You're reading too much into it." "I'm reading exactly what happened." He took a sip of coffee. "Naomi, these events are complicated. People shift things around all the time. It wasn't personal." I didn't respond immediately. Then I said, "It has been personal for a long time. You've just been comfortable pretending it isn't." That landed. He set his cup down a little harder than necessary. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means your family doesn't respect me, and you don't require them to. That's not fair." "It's accurate." He ran a hand through his hair. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I nodded once. "That's what I used to do," I said. "Make it smaller so it was easier for you." We stood there in silence for a few seconds. Then he said, "So what are you saying?" I picked up my notebook and slid it toward him. "I'm saying I'm done participating in situations where I'm treated like I don't belong." He looked at the notebook but didn't open it. "That sounds dramatic." "It's not." He exhaled slowly. "So what, you're just not going to come to family things anymore?" "I'll decide case by case." "That's going to create tension." "It already exists." He didn't argue that. Instead, he shifted to something else. "Lydia's hosting a smaller follow-up dinner next Saturday for the top donors and committee members. She asked if we could both come." I almost smiled at that. "Did she invite me?" I asked, "or did she ask if you were bringing me?" He hesitated. That was enough. "I won't be going," I said. He stared at me. "Seriously?" "Yes. It's important for me to be there." "Then you should go." "And you're just, what, opting out?" "I'm choosing where I put myself." He shook his head like he didn't recognize me. "Naomi, this is not how things work." "That's exactly the point." He didn't say anything after that. He grabbed his laptop, muttered something about having calls, and went upstairs. I stayed at the table a while longer. Then I got up, showered, changed, and drove into the office anyway. Because work, at least, was clear. When I walked into our Dallas office building just before noon, the receptionist looked up and said, "Hey, we heard about Oklahoma City. You guys handled that fast." "Team effort," I said. She smiled. Still impressive. Upstairs, my director, Paul Henderson, was in his office with the door open. He saw me and waved me in. "You should be sleeping," he said. I did a few hours. He leaned back in his chair. Miguel called me. Said you walked into that situation like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. You know what I mean. I sat down. He studied me for a second. How long have you been doing this now? 10 years. 12. He nodded slowly. You've outgrown your role. That wasn't a sentence I expected right then. What do you mean? I mean you're already operating at a level above your title. We've talked about restructuring the region, and after Friday, he shrugged. It's pretty clear who should be leading it. I stayed quiet. I'm putting together a proposal for a regional director position, he continued. Oversight for Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. Bigger budget. Bigger team. More responsibility. I felt something shift again, but this time in a different direction. Okay, I said. He smiled slightly. That's it? Just okay. I don't get excited until things are real. He laughed. Fair enough. I'll keep you posted. I stood up to leave. Naomi, he added. I turned. You don't have to prove anything here. We already know what you can do. I nodded. I know. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it. That week moved quickly. I kept my distance from anything related to the church or Daniel's family. I went to work, handled what needed handling, and came home. Daniel didn't bring up the Saturday dinner again until Friday evening. We were in the living room. He was going through emails on his phone. So he said casually, tomorrow starts at 6. It's at Lydia's place. I know where she lives. He looked up. You're really not coming? No, he sat back. This is going to look strange. To who? To everyone. I thought about that. Then they can ask you about it. He frowned. What am I supposed to say? The truth would be a good place to start. He didn't like that. That's going to make things worse. For who? He didn't answer. Instead, he said, Lydia specifically asked about you. I almost laughed. What did she say? He hesitated again. She just wanted to make sure you were coming. Did she? Yes. After Friday? He looked uncomfortable. She didn't mean anything by that. I stood up. I'm not going. That was the end of the conversation. Saturday evening, he left around 5:30 in a navy suit. I stayed home. I made myself dinner, watched a little TV, answered a few emails. Around 7:15, my phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the women I knew from church, Rachel. Hey, random question, are you here tonight? Lydia mentioned something about you helping with operations again, but I don't see you. I read it twice. Helping with operations again. I typed back, no, I'm not there. She replied almost immediately. Oh, that's weird. She told a few people you were coordinating logistics tonight. I set my phone down slowly. So that's how it was. Even in my absence, I was still being placed in the background. Still being used to fill a role I hadn't agreed to. I didn't respond to Rachel. I just sat there for a minute, thinking. Then I picked up my phone and opened my email. There was a message from Paul. Subject, draft proposal. Regional director. I opened it. It was real. Title, compensation structure. Expanded authority. Timeline. I read it carefully. Then I leaned back on the couch and let out a slow breath. At that exact moment, somewhere across the city, Daniel was probably standing in Lydia's living room, talking about opportunities, positioning, future plans. And I was sitting in my own house, looking at something that didn't depend on any of that. That didn't require approval from his family. That didn't need to be explained at a dinner table. I closed my laptop and looked around the room. Everything in that space existed because of decisions I had made. Quiet ones. Consistent ones. The kind no one applauds. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible in it. I felt clear. The next morning, Daniel came home around 10 o'clock. He looked tired, but not unhappy. How was it? I asked. Good, he said. Really good. He set his keys down and loosened his tie. Everyone asked about you. I'm sure they did. He sat across from me. I told them you had work. I nodded. Of course you did. He hesitated. Lydia said she missed having your help. I met his eyes. I'm not her help. He looked away first. And in that moment, I knew something else. The next time I walked into one of their rooms, it wouldn't be the same. Because I wasn't the same anymore. The public part didn't happen right away. That's another thing people assume, that once you decide something internally, the world immediately rearranges itself around that decision. It doesn't. Most of the time, nothing changes on the outside at first. The same people behave the same way. The same expectations stay in place. The difference is you stop cooperating with them. 2 weeks after that dinner, Grace Covenant held a Sunday leadership presentation for the Capital campaign. Not a full banquet this time, but still a formal event. Same people, same structure, same underlying hierarchy, just packaged as something more spiritual. Daniel told me about it on Thursday evening. They're doing a recognition segment for key contributors, he said. It's a big deal. I was sitting at the dining table reviewing a vendor contract. That's good, I said. They asked me to speak for a few minutes. I looked up. About what? Future leadership. Young professionals. That kind of thing. I nodded slowly. Okay. He watched me for a second. Are you coming? There was something different in the way he asked it. Less assumption. More caution. Yes, I said. He seemed surprised. You are. Yes. Good, he said quickly. I think it would be better if you were there. Better for him, he meant. I didn't say that. Sunday morning, I got dressed without overthinking it. Navy dress. Simple heels. Hair pulled back. Nothing that tried too hard. Nothing that apologized either. When we arrived, the parking lot was already full. Inside, the foyer looked almost identical to the banquet night. Same people. Same conversations. Same careful way everyone positioned themselves within the room. Lydia spotted us within a minute. She walked over, smiling. Naomi, she said, like we had seen each other yesterday. I'm so glad you could make it. I decided to come, I said. Her eyes flicked over my outfit for half a second. You look nice. Thank you. She turned to Daniel. We'll need you near the front after the second segment. Then back to me. And Naomi, if you don't mind, we may need a little help coordinating the exit flow after the program. Last time it got a bit crowded near the doors. There it was. Same tone. Same assumption. Like nothing had changed. I held her gaze for a moment. I won't be doing that, I said. She blinked. Excuse me. I'm not helping with coordination today. Her smile tightened just slightly. Oh, well, we're a bit short on volunteers. I understand. She waited, expecting me to fill the gap. I didn't. After a second, she said, all right. We'll manage. Good, I said. Daniel shifted beside me, uncomfortable. Lydia gave one last polite smile and walked away. We moved toward the seating area. This time, there were no place cards. Just sections reserved for different groups. Daniel was directed toward the front rows. I walked with him, then stopped one row back and sat down on the aisle. He looked at me. You can sit up here, he said. I'm fine here. He hesitated, then nodded and moved forward. I sat there, hands resting in my lap, and watched. The program started. Same structure as before. Welcome. Vision talk. Updates on the campaign. I recognize the patterns now. Not just the words, but the way people positioned themselves within it. Who spoke? Who was thanked? Who was visible? And who wasn't? About halfway through, Lydia took the stage. She spoke about commitment, sacrifice, and the people who had quietly supported the campaign behind the scenes. For a moment, I wondered if she would mention me. She didn't. Instead, she said, and of course, we are especially grateful for those who step in wherever needed, often without recognition. That's the heart of service. There was polite applause. I didn't react, because I understood something clearly by then. Being unnamed was not an oversight. It was a category. Then Daniel was called up. Daniel Holloway, Lydia said, has shown remarkable initiative in connecting with the next generation of leaders in our church. He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked to the stage. People clapped. He looked confident, comfortable. He began speaking. He talked about vision, opportunity, growth, about how the church needed people willing to step forward and lead. He used phrases I had heard him practice in the mirror a few times. It was a good speech, well delivered, well received. I watched him the entire time, not with resentment, with clarity. When he finished, there was strong applause. He stepped down, shook hands with a few people, and returned to his seat. Then something unexpected happened. The senior pastor stepped back up to the lectern. "Before we close," he said, "there's one more recognition we'd like to make." I didn't pay much attention at first. These events always had extra acknowledgments. But then he said, "Sometimes the most critical work happens outside the spotlight." That got my attention. He continued, "2 weeks ago, during our banquet weekend, one of our own left in the middle of the event to respond to a crisis at a medical facility." There was a small ripple of confusion in the room. I felt my chest tighten slightly. He went on, "While we were here raising funds and talking about impact, she was ensuring that patients in a surgical center had stable power through a severe system failure. Now people were listening. Because of her actions," he said, "that facility avoided a shutdown that could have affected dozens of procedures." There was a pause. Then he said my name, Naomi Holloway. The room shifted. I felt it before I fully processed it. People turning, looking, trying to connect the name to a face. I stayed seated. The pastor smiled slightly. "Naomi, would you stand for a moment?" I didn't want to. Not because I was embarrassed. Because I understood what this moment was, and I didn't want it to become something it wasn't. But I also knew refusing would create a different kind of attention. So I stood, quietly. No gesture. No performance. Just stood. There was a brief hesitation in the room, then applause started. Not loud at first, then stronger. I could see Lydia from the stage area. Her expression was controlled. Daniel had turned halfway in his seat, looking back at me like he was seeing something he hadn't noticed before. The pastor continued, "Naomi manages facilities across multiple states, and her work often goes unseen. But it is essential. Essential." That word landed differently. "Thank you," he said, "for what you do, not just here, but in the places where people depend on you every day." The applause continued for a few seconds longer. Then it faded. I sat back down. The program moved on. But the room wasn't the same. You can feel it when perception shifts. Not dramatically. Subtly. People recalculating. Reframing. Trying to understand where someone fits now that new information has entered the picture. After the closing prayer, people stood and began to move toward the exits. This was the part where Lydia had expected me to manage flow. I stayed where I was for a moment. Then I stood and walked toward the aisle. Not directing. Not organizing. Just walking. A couple from the finance committee stopped me. "I had no idea," the man said. "That's impressive." "Thank you," I said. His wife smiled. "You must have a very demanding role." "It keeps me busy." They nodded, like they were updating their internal understanding. As I moved toward the foyer, more people spoke to me. Short conversations. Polite. Curious. Different. Not warmer, exactly. More aware. That was the difference. Daniel caught up with me near the doors. "That was unexpected," he said. "Yes. You never told me they were going to do that." "I didn't know." He studied me. "I didn't realize the scope of what you handle." I looked at him. "You never asked." He didn't have an answer for that. Near the entrance, Lydia approached. Her expression was composed again. "That was a nice acknowledgement," she said. "Yes. I didn't know you were involved in something like that." "I am." She nodded slowly. "Well, it's good to see people recognizing different kinds of contributions. Different kinds." I almost smiled. "Yes," I said. "It is." There was a pause. Then she said, "We're hosting another planning session next month. It might be helpful to have your perspective." I met her eyes. "Let me know what you're asking for," I said. Not yes. Not no. Just clear. She understood the difference. "I will," she said. We stood there for a second. Then she stepped aside. I walked out into the sunlight. And for the first time in that place, I didn't feel like I had to adjust myself to fit the room. The room had adjusted, just a little, to fit reality. The real change didn't happen in that room. It happened in the weeks after. Because moments like that don't transform people overnight. They just interrupt patterns long enough for something new to become possible. The following Monday, Paul called me into his office again. "I sent the proposal up," he said. "It's approved." I sat down slowly. Approved? Regional director, he said. Effective next quarter. Salary adjustment, expanded team, full oversight for 3 states. I nodded once. Okay. He smiled. You're consistent. I'll give you that. I'll believe it when it's in writing. He slid a folder across the desk. It's in writing. I opened it. Everything we had discussed was there. Title, compensation, authority, reporting structure, real. I closed the folder. When do you want me to transition? I asked. He leaned back. Take 2 weeks to wrap your current responsibilities. After that, we announce. All right. As I stood to leave, he said, one more thing. I turned. You've been operating at this level for a while, he said. Now people are just going to call it what it is. I nodded. That was exactly right. That evening, I came home and found Daniel in the living room. He looked up when I walked in. How was your day? Good, I said. I set my bag down and handed him the folder. What's this? Work. He opened it. As he read, his expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. This is a big step, he said. Yes. When did this happen? It's been in motion for a while. He closed the folder. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at him. I did. You just didn't ask enough to understand it. He sat there for a moment, processing that. Then he said, this changes things. Yes, I said. It does. He nodded slowly. I'm proud of you, he added. I believed he meant it, but it felt different hearing it now. Not because it wasn't sincere, because I didn't need it the same way anymore. Over the next few weeks, small things shifted. At church, people spoke to me differently. Not dramatically. Not suddenly respectful in some obvious way. Just more intentional. They asked questions. They listened to answers. They didn't assume. Lydia reached out twice about planning meetings. The first time, I asked for specifics. Agenda. Scope. Time commitment. She sent them. Clear. Direct. I attended one meeting. I spoke when it made sense. I didn't fill silence just to be helpful. I didn't volunteer for background roles. And when the meeting ended, I left. No lingering. No extra effort to prove anything. She noticed. So did everyone else. At home, Daniel tried to adjust. He asked more questions. About work. About schedules. About decisions. At first, it felt unfamiliar. Then it felt appropriate. One evening, about a month after the recognition, we were sitting at the kitchen table. He said, I've been thinking about what you said. I waited. About not being flexible anymore, he added. I nodded. I didn't realize how much you were carrying, he said. That's because you didn't have to. He took that in. I want to do better, he said. I looked at him for a long moment. I'm not asking you to say that, I said. I'm asking you to live it. He nodded. I understand. And for the first time in a long time, I thought he might. Not because he said the right thing. Because he didn't argue. About 6 weeks after that Sunday, the church held a smaller leadership breakfast. Nothing formal. Just a gathering of key members. I was invited. Directly. By name. I went. When I walked into that room, no one redirected me. No one asked me to check anything. No one assumed I was there to support someone else's role. I took a seat at the table, and I stayed there. During the discussion, the senior pastor asked for input on how to prioritize the next phase of the building project. There was a pause. Then he looked at me. Naomi, from an operational standpoint, what would you recommend? The room went quiet. I answered. Clearly. Briefly. Directly. No extra explanation. No effort to impress. Just what was necessary. When I finished, he nodded. That's helpful, he said. And the conversation moved forward from there. Not around me. With me. That's the difference. Not applause. Not recognition. Position. Clarity. Understanding. Later that morning, as people were leaving, Lydia came over. You handled that well, she said. Thank you. She hesitated for a second. Then she said, I misjudged you before. I met her eyes. Yes, I said. You did. She didn't argue. I won't make that mistake again, she said. I nodded once. That's up to you. And that was the end of it. No apology speech. No dramatic reconciliation. Just a correction, which, honestly, was enough. That afternoon, I went home, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat on the back patio with a cup of coffee. The house was quiet. Daniel was out. The sun was low. I sat there for a while, thinking, not about what had happened, about what had changed. For years, I thought respect came from proving yourself over and over until people finally decided to see you differently. That's not how it works. People see what fits their version of the world, and they keep seeing it until something forces them to adjust. Sometimes that something is a moment. Sometimes it's a decision. For me, it was both. Not the recognition on stage, not the new title. Those mattered, but they weren't the point. The point was the moment I stopped accepting a place that didn't match reality. Everything after that just made it visible. I took a sip of coffee and looked out at the yard. Simple things. Quiet things. The kind that don't need an audience. That's where most real change happens. Not in front of people, inside decisions. And once those decisions are made, the rest of the world eventually catches up.